The bullet whizzed past Vivienne Porter's head so close she could feel the heat of it graze her temple. But she didn't flinch as she raised her rifle and fired back at the rustlers attempting to steal her cattle in broad daylight. It was June of 1882, and Wickenburg, Arizona territory, had seen its share of trouble. But Vivienne had carved out her own piece of land through sheer grit and determination, and she would be damned if she let anyone take what was hers. The cattle lowed nervously in the heat as gunfire echoed across the desert landscape, dust rising in clouds around the hooves of panicked steers. 3 men on horseback had driven a portion of her herd toward the rocky hills, thinking a woman alone would be easy prey. They were learning otherwise. Vivienne squeezed off another shot from behind the outcropping of rocks she had taken cover behind, her brown hair plastered to her forehead with sweat beneath her worn hat. She had been checking the water situation at the southern pasture when she spotted them, and thank God she had taken her Winchester along. The rifle kicked against her shoulder as she aimed for the lead rider's horse, not wanting to kill if she could help it, just scare them off her property. The horse reared, throwing its rider, and the other 2 men seemed to reconsider their choices. One of them shouted something she could not make out over the noise, and they began to retreat, leaving their companion scrambling in the dirt. Vivienne kept her rifle trained on them until they disappeared into the shimmering heat haze, then turned her attention to the fallen rustler who was now running on foot after his companions. "Cowards," she muttered, lowering her rifle and wiping the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. This was not the first time she had defended her land, and it probably would not be the last. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her raise the rifle again, but these came from the direction of town, not the hills. A lone rider appeared, sitting tall in the saddle on a paint horse, and even from a distance she could see he was moving with purpose toward her. Vivienne did not lower her weapon until she could make out more details. A tall man in a dark hat, with a holster on his hip, and the easy posture of someone who spent more time on horseback than on his own 2 feet. He slowed as he approached, raising one hand to show he meant no harm. "Saw the trouble from the ridge," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "Thought you might need help, but looks like you handled it yourself." Vivienne finally lowered her rifle, though she did not put it away. "I do not need help," she said, her voice sharp despite the lingering adrenaline making her want to shake. "I have been managing just fine on my own." The rider came closer, and she could see his face now beneath the brim of his hat. He was perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-darkened skin and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything about her situation in a single glance. A strong jaw was covered with a few days of stubble, and there was something in the set of his shoulders that spoke of confidence without arrogance. "Did not say you needed help, madam," he replied, bringing his horse to a stop a respectful distance away. "Just said I thought you might. There is a difference." He glanced toward the hills where the rustlers had disappeared. Those looked like some of the Carson gang. "They have been working this area for the past month." "Well, they will think twice before trying my land again," Vivienne said, finally sliding the rifle back into its scabbard on her saddle. Her horse, a sturdy roan mare named Duchess, had stayed ground-tied through the whole ordeal, trained well enough not to bolt at gunfire. "I appreciate your concern, mister, but as you can see, I can take care of myself." The man nodded slowly, and something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "I can see that plain enough. Name is Dalton Hayes. I just hired on as foreman at the Running Creek Ranch about 5 miles north of here." He touched the brim of his hat. "Your neighbor, I suppose." Vivienne studied him for a moment, taking in the worn but well-maintained gear, the quality of his horse, the way he sat relaxed but alert in the saddle. Running Creek was owned by old Samuel Thornton, who had been talking about bringing in someone to help manage the place since his arthritis had gotten so bad. If Samuel trusted this man, that said something, though Vivienne had learned long ago that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. "Vivienne Porter," she said finally, because manners dictated an introduction even if she did not particularly want his company. "This is the Double P Ranch, all 1,200 acres of it." There was pride in her voice because every inch of this land represented years of backbreaking work, of proving wrong every man who had told her a woman could not make it alone out here. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Porter," Dalton said. He glanced at the cattle that were still milling about nervously. "You run this whole spread yourself?" "I have 2 hands who help with the heavy work," Vivienne replied, a bit defensively. "Miguel and his son Carlos, they are good workers." She did not mention that they were the only men willing to work for a woman boss, or that she paid them less than she should because it was all she could afford. "But yes, I manage everything myself. The books, the stock, the land management, all of it." Dalton nodded again, and that infuriating look of respect was still in his eyes, as if he found her situation admirable rather than strange. Most men either pitied her or resented her for taking on what they considered man's work. "Must keep you busy," he said. "Busy enough that I should get back to checking those water levels," Vivienne said, gathering up Duchess's reins. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving her feeling suddenly tired and aware of how close that bullet had come. But she would not show weakness in front of this stranger, no matter how steady his gaze or how genuine his concern seemed. "Those rustlers might come back with more men," Dalton said, not moving his horse. "The Carson gang is not known for giving up easy." "Then they will find the same reception," Vivienne replied. She swung up into her saddle with practiced ease, settling her split skirt around her legs. She had given up on riding side saddle years ago, practicality winning out over propriety. "Good day, Mr. Hayes." "Thank you for your concern, but it was not necessary." She urged Duchess forward, intending to ride past him and get back to her work, but his next words stopped her. "I have got no doubt you can handle yourself, Miss Porter. That was some fine shooting. But there is no shame in accepting help when it is freely offered. Even the strongest among us can be stronger with others standing beside them." Vivienne turned in her saddle to look back at him, something in his tone making her study his face more carefully. He was not smiling, but there was warmth in his expression, and none of the condescension she had come to expect from men. "I have been standing on my own for 5 years now, Mr. Hayes. I have learned that the only person you can truly count on is yourself." "Maybe so," Dalton replied. "But that sounds like a lonely way to live." The words struck something deep inside her, some place she had locked away when her father died and left her this ranch, when her brother had tried to take it from her claiming she was not capable, when the bank had nearly foreclosed and she had fought tooth and nail to keep every acre. Yes, it was lonely, but lonely was better than dependent, better than vulnerable, better than trusting someone only to be let down. "Lonely is honest," she said quietly. Then she clicked her tongue and urged Duchess into a trot, leaving Dalton Hayes sitting on his paint horse in the middle of her pasture, watching her ride away. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of work. Vivienne checked the water levels in the southern tanks, finding them lower than she liked but still adequate for another week if the weather held. She rode the fence line, looking for breaks or weak spots, and found 3 places where the wire needed tightening. By the time the sun started to sink toward the western horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, she was exhausted and covered in dust, her hands aching from the work. Miguel and Carlos were already at the barn when she returned, tending to their own horses after a day of moving cattle to better grazing. Miguel was in his 50s, his face weathered and kind, while Carlos was 19, still learning the trade but eager and hardworking. "We heard gunfire," Miguel said as Vivienne dismounted, his dark eyes concerned. "Are you all right, Miss Vivienne?" "Rustlers," she replied, beginning to unsaddle Duchess. "3 of them. They ran off when I returned fire." She decided not to mention how close that first bullet had come, or how her hands had shaken for several minutes afterward. "We should keep extra watch for the next few days. They might try again." Carlos whistled low. 3 men. You faced down 3 men alone." "I was not about to let them steal our cattle," Vivienne said matter-of-factly, though she appreciated the admiration in the young man's voice. She hauled the saddle off Duchess's back, her muscles protesting. She was strong, had built up her strength over years of ranch work, but she was still tired after a long day. "I will take first watch tonight," Miguel offered. "Carlos can take second. You need rest." Vivienne wanted to argue, to insist she would take a watch herself, but the truth was she needed sleep. Tomorrow would bring another full day of work, and she could not afford to be anything less than sharp. "Thank you," she said, the words coming easier than they once had. She had learned to accept help from Miguel and Carlos, though she still struggled with the concept of needing anyone. After caring for Duchess and making sure the other horses had feed and water, Vivienne walked the short distance to her house, a sturdy adobe structure her father had built 20 years ago when he first claimed this land. It was small, just 3 rooms, but it was hers. She had fought to keep it, and that made it precious beyond any mansion. Inside, she lit a lamp and heated water for washing, scrubbing away the day's dust and grime. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman of 26, sun-browned skin, dark brown eyes that had seen too much hardship too young, and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile easily. She was not beautiful, she knew, not in the delicate way that society ladies were beautiful. Her hands were calloused, her arms strong, her face too weathered from the sun. But she was alive and she was free, and that was worth more than beauty. As she prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, her mind kept drifting back to Dalton Hayes. There had been something different about him, something that unsettled her in a way she could not quite name. Most men looked at her with either disdain or inappropriate interest, seeing either a woman failing at a man's job or a woman alone who might be available. But Dalton had looked at her with respect, as if her independence was something to admire rather than pity or overcome. "That sounds like a lonely way to live." She pushed the memory of his words away, focusing on her meal, on her plans for tomorrow. She needed to ride into Wickenburg to pick up supplies and check at the bank about extending her loan for another season. The thought of dealing with the bank made her stomach tighten with anxiety, but she had been managing to stay just ahead of foreclosure for 3 years now. One more season, one good season, and she might finally be able to breathe easy. Sleep came hard that night, as it often did. She lay in her narrow bed listening to the sounds of the desert, the distant call of a coyote, the rustle of wind through the mesquite trees, and underneath it all, the memory of gunfire and a bullet that had come too close. She had meant what she said to Dalton. She did not need help. But in the darkness, with only her own thoughts for company, she could admit to herself that wanting help and needing it were 2 different things. And lately, she had found herself wanting something she could not quite name. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching summer day. Vivienne was up before sunrise, as always, tending to the animals and checking in with Miguel about the watch. Nothing had disturbed the night, which was a relief. She dressed in her least worn dress, a simple blue cotton that was still respectable enough for town, and braided her hair back neatly. The ride into Wickenburg took just over an hour, Duchess moving at an easy pace on the well-worn road. The town was small but growing, with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church, a school, a bank, and several stores. Wickenburg had started as a mining town, but as the easy gold played out, it had transformed into a ranching and farming community, fed by the Hassaamper River and the determination of people willing to make a life in the harsh desert. Vivienne tied Duchess to the hitching post outside the general store and stepped up onto the wooden sidewalk, her boots making hollow sounds on the planks. Inside, the store was dim and cool, a relief from the already building heat outside. Old Mr. Patterson was behind the counter, his spectacles sliding down his nose as he tallied up accounts. "Morning, Miss Porter," he said, looking up with a smile. Mr. Patterson had always been kind to her, extending credit when she needed it and never making her feel lesser for being a woman running her own affairs. "What can I get for you today?" "I need flour, sugar, coffee, and salt," Vivienne replied, pulling out her list. "Also some lamp oil and ammunition if you have it. Winchester rounds." Mr. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly at the last item, but he simply nodded and began gathering her order. "Heard there was some trouble out your way yesterday. Rustlers?" News traveled fast in a small town. "Nothing I could not handle," Vivienne said, keeping her voice neutral. She did not want to discuss it, did not want the questions or the concern or the inevitable suggestions that she should sell the ranch and move to town where it was safer. "I am sure you handled it just fine," Mr. Patterson said, and to his credit, he sounded like he meant it. "Still, you might want to talk to the new foreman at Running Creek. Dalton Hayes, I think his name is. He has been organizing some of the ranchers to patrol together, watch for rustlers. Safety in numbers, you know." "I will consider it," Vivienne said, though she had no intention of doing so. She did not need to coordinate with other ranchers, especially not with Dalton Hayes, whose words still echoed uncomfortably in her mind. As Mr. Patterson wrapped her purchases, the door opened and a woman entered, elegant in a way that made Vivienne immediately aware of her own worn dress and dusty boots. The woman was perhaps 30, with blonde hair styled in the latest fashion, and a dress that must have cost more than Vivienne spent on supplies in 6 months. "Good morning, Mr. Patterson," the woman said in a cultured voice. Then her eyes landed on Vivienne, and something cold flickered in them. "Oh, Miss Porter, I heard about your excitement yesterday. How frightening that must have been." Vivienne recognized her as Catherine Wells, wife of one of the larger ranchers in the area. Catherine had made it clear on multiple occasions that she found Vivienne's lifestyle scandalous and inappropriate. "It was handled," Vivienne said shortly. "I am sure it was," Catherine said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Still, one wonders how long a woman alone can continue to manage such responsibilities. Perhaps it would be better to find a husband, someone who could properly protect you and manage the ranch." The words were like a slap, all the more insulting for being delivered in such a sweet tone. Vivienne felt her spine stiffen. "I do not need protecting, Mrs. Wells, and I certainly do not need a husband to manage what I have built myself." Catherine's smile turned pitying. "Of course, dear, how independent of you." She turned to Mr. Patterson. "I just need to pick up the lace I ordered. Is it in yet?" Vivienne gathered her packages, her face burning with anger and humiliation. She paid Mr. Patterson quickly and escaped to the street, loading her supplies into Duchess's saddlebags with hands that trembled slightly. The encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, touching on all her deepest fears and insecurities. Miss Porter. She turned to find Dalton Hayes walking toward her, leading his paint horse. He was dressed much as he had been yesterday, practical clothes that spoke of hard work, though he had clearly made an effort to clean up for town. He looked genuinely pleased to see her, which only made her more uncomfortable. "Mr. Hayes," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "I was hoping I might run into you," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I wanted to apologize if I overstepped yesterday. It was not my place to comment on your life or choices." The apology surprised her, genuine and without excuses. She found her anger deflating slightly. "You were only expressing concern. No apology necessary." "Still, I should have just offered my help and left it at that," Dalton said. He shifted his weight, and she got the sense he was trying to find the right words. "The truth is, I have heard about you, about how you have kept your ranch going against all odds. It is impressive. Most people, men or women, would not have the strength for it." Vivienne did not know what to say to that. Compliments made her uncomfortable, especially from men, because they so often came with expectations attached. "I do what needs to be done," she said finally. "That is more than most can say," Dalton replied. He glanced toward the bank down the street. "Are you heading that way?" "I have some business there myself. We could walk together, if you do not mind the company." She should say no. She should mount Duchess and ride back to her ranch and keep the walls firmly in place around herself. But something in his open expression, in the genuine respect she saw in his eyes, made her hesitate. "I do not mind," she heard herself say. They walked side by side down the wooden sidewalk, leading their horses behind them. It felt strange to Vivienne, walking with a man like this, almost like equals. She was so used to being either dismissed or condescended to that she did not quite know how to handle this middle ground. "How long have you been running the Double P?" Dalton asked as they walked. 5 years, Vivienne replied. "My father died and left it to me. My brother challenged the will, said a woman could not manage a ranch, but the judge ruled in my favor." She did not mention the bitter family rift that had resulted, or the fact that she had not spoken to her brother since. "Your father must have known you were capable," Dalton said. "Not every man would have the vision to see past convention like that." "He taught me everything," Vivienne said, and despite herself, warmth crept into her voice. "From the time I could walk, I was following him around the ranch. He never treated me differently for being a girl. He said capability had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with will." Sounds like a wise man. He was. Vivienne felt the familiar ache of loss, though it had dulled with time. "What about you? How did you end up in Wickenburg?" Dalton was quiet for a moment, and she wondered if she had overstepped. But then he spoke, his voice even. "I have been working ranches since I was 14 when my parents died of fever. Started as a ranch hand, worked my way up to foreman. I have been all over, Texas, New Mexico, Colorado. Heard that Mr. Thornton was looking for someone reliable, and I was ready to settle in one place for a while." 14 is young to be on your own," Vivienne said softly. "About the same age you were when you started learning the ranch, I would guess," Dalton replied. "We do what we have to do to survive." They had reached the bank, a solid brick building that stood out among Wickenburg's mostly wooden structures. Vivienne paused at the door, suddenly nervous about going inside. She owed the bank money, had owed them money for years, and every interaction with the banker was a reminder of how precarious her situation truly was. "Are you all right?" Dalton asked, and she realized she had been standing frozen with her hand on the door handle. "Fine," she said, forcing herself to move. "Just not my favorite place." The interior of the bank was cool and dim, with a large oak desk dominating the space. Behind it sat Horace Pemberton, a thin man with sharp features and an even sharper way of looking at accounts. He glanced up as they entered, and his expression soured slightly when he saw Vivienne. "Miss Porter," he said, his tone making it clear she was not his favorite customer. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to discuss my loan," Vivienne said, approaching the desk with more confidence than she felt. "I am planning to sell some cattle in the fall, and I wanted to see about making a larger payment then." Pemberton shuffled through some papers, pulling out a file that Vivienne knew contained all the details of her debt. "Your account is current, barely. But Miss Porter, I must be frank with you. This bank cannot continue to extend credit indefinitely. You have been making minimum payments for 3 years now. We need to see some real progress towards settling this debt." "I understand that," Vivienne said, keeping her voice level despite the anxiety coiling in her stomach. "That is why I am planning to sell more cattle this year. If I can get a good price, I should be able to make a substantial payment." "And if you do not get a good price?" Pemberton asked, raising his eyebrows. "Or if something happens to your cattle?" "We have already discussed the risks of a woman trying to manage such an enterprise alone. Perhaps it would be better to sell the property, settle your debts, and pursue something more suitable to your situation." The words hit like a physical blow, all her worst fears spoken aloud in this cold, professional voice. Vivienne felt her hands clench into fists at her sides. "The ranch is not for sale, Mr. Pemberton. I will meet my obligations." "See that you do," Pemberton said, closing the file with a snap. "Because I will be honest with you, Miss Porter. If you cannot make significant progress by the end of this year, the bank will have no choice but to foreclose. We have been patient, but patience has its limits." Vivienne left the bank feeling like she had been punched in the stomach, the bright sunlight outside almost painful after the dim interior. She stood on the sidewalk, trying to compose herself, aware that Dalton had witnessed the entire exchange. She did not want his pity, did not want to see the sympathy she knew would be in his eyes. "That man is a bastard," Dalton said, his voice tight with anger. "Pardon my language, but there is no other word for it." The unexpected fury in his voice made Vivienne look at him in surprise. He was not looking at her with pity at all. He was looking back at the bank with disgust, his jaw clenched. "He is just doing his job," Vivienne said, though the words tasted bitter. "His job does not require him to be cruel about it," Dalton replied. He turned to her and his expression softened. "You are going to make it, you know. I have seen your operation, seen how you handle yourself. You are going to prove all of them wrong." Vivienne wanted to believe him, wanted to hold onto that certainty in his voice. But the weight of her debt, of the endless struggle to keep her head above water, felt overwhelming in that moment. "You do not know that," she said quietly. "Maybe not," Dalton admitted, "but I believe it. And maybe what you need is someone else who believes in you too, someone who can help shoulder some of the burden." He paused, then added carefully, "I know you value your independence, but there is a difference between being independent and being alone. You can be strong on your own and still accept help. You can be capable and still have someone stand beside you." "Why do you care?" Vivienne asked, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "You do not even know me. Why does it matter to you what happens to my ranch?" Dalton was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those steady dark eyes. "Honestly, I do not entirely know. But from the moment I saw you yesterday, taking on 3 rustlers without flinching, I thought, there is someone worth knowing, someone with real courage." He smiled slightly. "And maybe I am tired of being alone too." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that made Vivienne's heart skip. She did not know what to say, did not know how to respond to this kind of openness. All her defenses, all her carefully constructed walls, felt suddenly inadequate. "I should get back to the ranch," she said finally, because it was easier than examining the confused feelings swirling inside her. "There is work to be done." "Of course," Dalton said, and if he was disappointed by her retreat, he did not show it. "But Miss Porter, if you need anything at all, I am at the Running Creek Ranch. That is not charity or pity. That is just what neighbors should do for each other." Vivienne nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She mounted Duchess and turned toward home, but she could feel Dalton's gaze following her as she rode away, and the feeling stayed with her all the way back to the Double P. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and worry. Vivienne threw herself into the ranch with renewed determination, rising before dawn and working until she could barely stand. She checked and rechecked her cattle count, calculated and recalculated her finances, trying to find some way to make the numbers work. Miguel and Carlos watched her with concern, but she waved off their questions, insisting she was fine. She was not fine. The encounter at the bank had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, forcing her to face the very real possibility that she might lose everything she had fought for. At night, she lay awake running scenarios in her head, trying to find a path forward that did not end in foreclosure. And through it all, she kept thinking about Dalton Hayes. She told herself it was just because he had witnessed her humiliation at the bank, or because his words had unsettled her usual certainty. But the truth was more complicated. In the brief interactions they had shared, he had treated her as an equal, respected her capabilities while still offering support. It was a combination she had never experienced before, and she did not quite know what to do with it. She saw him again 3 weeks after their encounter in town. She had been riding the northern border of her property, checking for any signs of the rustlers returning, when she spotted him on the other side of the fence line that separated her land from Running Creek. He was working on repairing a section of fence, his shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening on his forearms in the hot sun. He looked up as she approached, and a smile broke across his face. "Miss Porter, good to see you." "Mr. Hayes," she replied, bringing Duchess to a stop. "Fence trouble." "Someone cut the wire," Dalton said, holding up a severed section. "Rustlers, most likely trying to make a path to move stolen cattle through. I have found 3 breaks like this in the past week." Vivienne felt her stomach tighten. "I have had breaks too. 2 on my southern fence, 1 on the east." She dismounted, coming closer to examine the cut wire. "This looks recent." "Within the last day or 2, Dalton agreed. He looked at her seriously. "The Carson gang is getting bolder. They hit the Martinez place 2 nights ago, ran off with nearly 50 head of cattle. Old man Martinez is beside himself." 50 head, Vivienne breathed. That would be devastating to any ranch, but especially to a smaller operation like Martinez's or like hers. Did he have anyone watching? He had 1 man, but there were too many of them. 6 riders, maybe more. Dalton set down his tools, giving her his full attention. "That is what I have been trying to tell the other ranchers. We need to work together on this, coordinate our efforts. 1 or 2 men cannot fight off a gang that size, but if we pool our resources, take turns patrolling together, we have a better chance." "And what did the other ranchers say?" Vivienne asked, though she thought she could guess. Most of them agreed. "We have got a schedule worked out, rotating patrols covering the main approaches to our properties." Dalton paused. "I included the Double P in the rotation, if you are willing. I figured your land needs protecting as much as anyone's." Vivienne felt a mix of emotions at his words. Part of her wanted to refuse, to insist she could handle her own protection. But the practical part, the part that had kept her alive and her ranch running for 5 years, recognized the wisdom of what he was suggesting. 6 riders was too many for her to face alone. If the Carson gang came for her cattle in force, she would lose everything. What would it require? She asked carefully. 2 men, 3 nights a week, patrolling from dusk to midnight, Dalton explained. The schedule rotates so no one is out every night. And in return, other ranchers patrol near your land on the nights you are not out. He met her eyes steadily. It is not charity, Miss Porter. Every rancher contributes equally. We are all in this together. We are all in this together. The words echoed something he had said before, about being strong together. Vivienne looked at the cut fence wire, thought about 50 stolen cattle, about the bank's threat of foreclosure. Pride was one thing, but stupidity was another. I can contribute myself and Miguel, she said finally. Carlos is still young and I need someone at the ranch. She raised her chin, meeting Dalton's gaze. But I want to be clear. This is a practical arrangement between neighbors, nothing more. Something flickered in Dalton's eyes, something that might have been amusement or understanding or both. Of course, nothing more. He pulled a paper from his saddle bag, showing her the patrol schedule. I put you down for Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights. Does that work? Vivienne studied the schedule, noting that Dalton himself was listed for Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, with other ranchers filling in the remaining nights. It was well organized, covering the major approaches to all the participating ranches. Despite herself, she was impressed. This works, she said. Miguel and I will be ready. Good. Dalton folded the schedule away. We start tonight. I will be at the northeast crossing point if you want to coordinate. Vivienne nodded, then hesitated. There was something she needed to say, even though the words did not come easily. Thank you for including my ranch in this, for not assuming I would not want to participate. Why would I assume that? Dalton asked, genuinely puzzled. You have got as much at stake as any of us, more maybe, given your situation. He said it without pity, just stating a fact, and somehow that made it easier to accept. Most people think a woman has no place riding night patrols, Vivienne said. Or managing a ranch at all, for that matter. Most people are fools, Dalton replied bluntly. I judge people by what they do, not what they are, and from what I have seen, you do just fine. The simple acceptance in his words made something warm unfurl in Vivienne's chest, something she quickly tried to tamp down. She could not afford to develop feelings for this man, could not afford to trust in anything beyond her own capabilities. But it was getting harder to maintain that distance, harder to ignore the way her heart lifted when she saw him. I should get back, she said, mounting Duchess again. I will see you at the northeast crossing tonight. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Vivienne and Miguel rode out to meet the patrol. The northeast crossing was a narrow pass between 2 low hills, a natural choke point where rustlers might try to move stolen cattle. Dalton was already there when they arrived, along with another rancher Vivienne recognized as Tom Henderson. Evening, Dalton greeted them, his paint horse dancing slightly beneath him. Tom and I will take the western approach. Can you two cover the eastern canyon? We can, Vivienne confirmed. She glanced at the darkening sky. Any sign of trouble so far? Quiet as church, Tom said. He was a grizzled man in his 50s with a weathered face and shrewd eyes. He nodded at Vivienne with respect. Good to have you with us, Miss Porter. Heard you are handy with that rifle. I can shoot straight enough, Vivienne replied, pleased by the acceptance in his tone. The 4 of them split up, Vivienne and Miguel heading east while Dalton and Tom went west. The desert night settled around them, surprisingly cool after the heat of the day, filled with the sounds of crickets and the occasional call of an owl. Vivienne kept her rifle ready across her saddle, her eyes scanning the darkness. This is good, what Mr. Hayes has organized, Miguel said quietly as they rode. safer for everyone. Yes, Vivienne agreed. It is smart thinking. He is a good man, Miguel continued, and Vivienne could hear the smile in his voice even though she could not see his face in the darkness. And he looks at you with admiration, I think. Miguel, Vivienne said warningly, but the older man just chuckled. I am just saying what I see. And what I see is a good man who respects you, and a woman who maybe should not push away every helping hand offered to her. I am not pushing anyone away, Vivienne protested. I am participating in the patrol, am I not? You are, Miguel agreed. It is a start. They rode in silence for a while, circling through the canyons and washes that made up the eastern approach. The night remained quiet, no sign of rustlers or trouble. Around 11, they met back up with Dalton and Tom at the crossing point. All clear on our end, Dalton reported. How about you? Nothing, Vivienne said. Maybe they have moved on to easier targets. Maybe, Dalton said, though he did not sound convinced. Or maybe they are just waiting, watching our patterns. He looked at each of them in turn. Stay alert. These are smart, dangerous men. They parted ways, Vivienne and Miguel riding back to the Double P. Vivienne felt the exhaustion of the long day settling into her bones, but there was also a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time in years, she had not been entirely alone in protecting her land. It was a small thing, sharing patrol duty with neighbors, but it felt significant somehow. The pattern continued over the following weeks. 3 nights a week, Vivienne and Miguel rode out to join the rotating patrols. Sometimes they paired with Dalton, sometimes with Tom or one of the other ranchers. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Vivienne found herself looking forward to the nights when Dalton was her partner. He was easy to talk to, she discovered. During the long hours of patrol, they would ride side by side and conversation would flow naturally. He told her about his years of wandering, the different ranches he had worked, the places he had seen. She found herself sharing things she rarely spoke of, her memories of her father, her struggles to keep the ranch running, even her fears about the bank and foreclosure. You will find a way, Dalton said one night when she had confessed her worries about making the payment the bank demanded. They were stopped at a high point overlooking a wide valley, the stars brilliant overhead. You are too stubborn to fail. Stubbornness only gets you so far, Vivienne replied, but she smiled as she said it. It has gotten you this far, Dalton pointed out. And you are not just stubborn. You are smart and capable and willing to work harder than anyone I have ever met. He turned in his saddle to look at her, his face serious in the starlight. I meant what I said before. If you need help, any kind of help, you just have to ask. I am not good at asking, Vivienne admitted. I have spent so long proving I can do everything myself. It is hard to admit when I cannot. Independence is not the same as isolation, Dalton said gently. You can be strong and capable and still accept support from people who care about you. That does not make you weak. It makes you human. Vivienne looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the genuine care in his expression. Is that what you are, someone who cares about me? Yes, Dalton said simply. I am. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Vivienne felt her heart racing, felt the walls she had built around herself starting to crack. It terrified her, this feeling, this pull toward another person. But it also felt right in a way nothing had in a long time. I am not looking for romance, she said, the words coming out more harshly than she intended. I cannot afford to be distracted or dependent. My ranch, my independence, those things have to come first. I am not asking you to give up anything, Dalton replied. I am just asking you to consider that maybe you do not have to face everything alone. That maybe being independent and being in a partnership are not mutually exclusive. He smiled slightly. You are too independent, you keep telling me. Well, maybe what you need is not to be less independent, but to find someone who respects that independence and wants to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you. Then we would be strong together, Vivienne said softly, remembering his words from their first meeting. Exactly. Dalton's smile widened. Two people, both strong on their own, choosing to combine their strength. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. Vivienne did not know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to argue to maintain her defenses and keep him at a distance. But another part, a part that had been lonely for so long, wanted desperately to believe him. Wanted to believe that she could have both her independence and someone to share her life with. Before she could formulate a response, the sharp crack of gunfire echoed across the valley. Both of them instantly went on alert, hands moving to their weapons. That came from the south, Dalton said, already turning his horse. The Martinez place. They spurred their horses into a gallop, racing toward the sound of gunfire. As they got closer, Vivienne could see the orange glow of flames against the night sky. Her heart sank. Fire was every rancher's nightmare in this dry country. They crested a rise and saw the Martinez ranch below, one of the outbuildings ablaze. Dark figures on horseback were silhouetted against the flames, and Vivienne could hear the panicked lowing of cattle being driven away. "The Carson gang," Dalton said grimly. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard. "We need to help." More riders were converging on the scene from different directions, other ranchers responding to the sound of trouble. Vivienne counted at least 6 of the rustlers, heavily armed and organized. They were using the fire as a distraction, drawing attention while they made off with the cattle. "We have got them outnumbered now," Vivienne said, noting that at least 8 ranchers had arrived to help, with more coming. "Let us end this," Dalton said. He raised his voice, calling to the other ranchers. "Circle around, cut off their escape to the north. Do not let them get away with those cattle." The ranchers moved with surprising coordination, the weeks of patrolling together having created a sense of teamwork. Vivienne found herself riding hard alongside Tom Henderson, circling to block the northern exit while Dalton and others came from the west. The rustlers realized they were being surrounded and tried to make a break for it, abandoning the cattle and spurring their horses toward the eastern hills. But the ranchers were ready, closing in from all sides. Gunfire crackled through the night, though both sides seemed more interested in warning shots than killing. One of the rustlers broke away from the group, heading straight for Vivienne. She raised her rifle and fired, aiming for the ground in front of his horse. The animal reared, throwing its rider. The man hit the ground hard and did not get up. Within minutes, it was over. 3 of the rustlers were captured, the others scattered into the night but without any stolen cattle. The ranchers gathered at the Martinez ranch, some helping to fight the fire, others securing the prisoners. Old Mr. Martinez came out of his house, his face streaked with soot but his eyes bright with gratitude. "You saved my herd," he said, his voice breaking. "All of you. I cannot thank you enough." "That is what neighbors do," Tom said gruffly. "Help each other." As the excitement died down and the fire was brought under control, Vivienne found herself standing apart from the group, her hands shaking with delayed adrenaline. The danger had been real. The bullets flying past had not all been aimed at the ground. She could have been killed. Any of them could have. "You all right?" Dalton appeared at her side, his face concerned in the flickering light from the dying fire. "I am fine," Vivienne said automatically. Then, more honestly, "No, I am shaking like a leaf." "That is normal after a fight," Dalton said. "The fear catches up after the danger passes." He hesitated, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did good tonight. That shot that took down the rider coming at you, that was impressive." Vivienne looked up at him, and suddenly the adrenaline and fear and exhaustion all mixed together into something else, something that made her acutely aware of how close he was standing, how warm his hand felt on her shoulder, how much she wanted to lean into his strength. "I am too independent," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "That is what you said I keep telling you, and it is true. I have been so focused on proving I do not need anyone that I have forgotten what it is like to want someone." Dalton's expression softened. "And do you?" "Want someone? I think I might," Vivienne whispered. "I think I might want you." For a moment they just stood there, the chaos of the night fading into background noise. Then Dalton smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Then we will be strong together," he said. "If you will let me stand beside you." Vivienne felt something inside her give way, some final resistance crumbling. She had been so afraid of needing anyone, of being vulnerable, but maybe Dalton was right. Maybe there was a way to be both independent and partnered, to maintain her strength while sharing it with someone else. "I would like that," she said. "I would like to try." Dalton's hand moved from her shoulder to gently cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a smudge of soot. "We will figure it out together. At your pace, on your terms. I am not going anywhere." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and sweet, a promise rather than a demand. Vivienne felt herself relaxing into him, letting herself feel something she had denied for so long. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should probably help clean up," Vivienne said, though she made no move to step away. "Probably," Dalton agreed, equally unmoved. They stood there a moment longer, just looking at each other, before finally rejoining the other ranchers. But something had shifted between them. Some barrier crossed. And as they worked side by side to help Mr. Martinez secure his property, Vivienne felt lighter than she had in years. The next few months brought changes to the Double P and to Vivienne's life. With the Carson gang scattered and their leaders in custody, the rustling problem diminished significantly. The organized patrols continued, but more as a precaution than a necessity. And through it all, Vivienne and Dalton grew closer. It was not a whirlwind romance. Vivienne was too cautious for that, too protective of her independence and her ranch. But slowly, steadily, Dalton became a part of her life. He would ride over on his days off, helping with heavy work around the Double P without being asked, always careful to treat it as neighboring rather than interference. He consulted her on decisions about the Running Creek Ranch, valuing her opinion and treating her as an equal. And gradually, Vivienne learned to let him in. She learned that accepting help did not make her weak, that sharing her burdens did not mean giving up control. She learned that love, real love, did not demand that she make herself smaller or less capable. Instead, Dalton seemed to take pride in her strength, to admire her determination. They talked about everything during those months. Their hopes and dreams, their fears and failures. Dalton confessed that he had spent so many years wandering because he had never found a place that felt like home, a community worth settling down for. Vivienne admitted that her fierce independence was born partly from necessity and partly from fear, from not wanting to be hurt or disappointed by trusting others. "You know what I think?" Dalton said one evening as they sat on the porch of her house, watching the sun set over the desert. "I think independence is not about not needing anyone. It is about being whole enough on your own that you can choose to be with someone without losing yourself." Vivienne considered that, leaning back against the porch post. "I have spent so long defining myself by what I do not need. I do not need a man to take care of me. I do not need help running my ranch. I do not need anyone's approval or permission." She looked at him, seeing the patient understanding in his eyes. "But maybe what I do need is to figure out what I do want, not just what I am running from." "And what do you want?" Dalton asked softly. Vivienne took a breath, letting herself be honest. "I want to keep my ranch. I want to prove that I can make it work. But I want someone to share it with. Not someone to take over or fix everything, but someone who understands the value of what I have built and wants to build alongside me." She met his eyes. "I want you." Dalton reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "You have got me, for as long as you want me. Even though I am stubborn and difficult and too independent for my own good," Vivienne asked, half joking. "Especially because of those things," Dalton said, smiling. "Though I might argue that you are determined rather than stubborn, strong-willed rather than difficult, and that there is no such thing as too independent, only people who do not understand what real independence means." Vivienne laughed, a sound that came more easily now than it had months ago. "You have an answer for everything, do you not?" "I try," Dalton said. Then, more seriously, "Vivienne, I want to ask you something, and I want you to feel free to say no if you are not ready." Her heart started beating faster. "What is it?" "Marry me," Dalton said simply. "Not because you need me to save your ranch, or because you cannot manage on your own. You have proven you can do both of those things. Marry me because we are better together than apart, because I love you and I think you love me, and because I want to spend the rest of my life standing beside you while you do amazing things." Vivienne felt tears prick her eyes, emotions overwhelming her. This was what she had been afraid of for so long, this vulnerability, this opening herself to another person. But with Dalton, it did not feel like giving up her strength. It felt like multiplying it. "I do love you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "That terrifies me, but I do." "I know it does," Dalton said gently. "And I am not asking you to stop being afraid or to change who you are. I am just asking you to take a chance on us." Vivienne looked at him, this man who had somehow slipped past all her defenses, who saw her strength and her struggles and loved her for both. She thought about the future, about facing it alone versus facing it with a partner who respected her capabilities while offering his own strength. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Dalton's face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into a kiss that was deeper and more passionate than any they had shared before. When they finally broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. "We will need to figure out logistics," Vivienne said, her practical mind already working. "You are the foreman at Running Creek and I have got the double P. How do we make that work?" "We will figure it out," Dalton assured her. "Maybe I can talk to Mr. Thornton about adjusting my duties, spending part of my time at each ranch. Or maybe we can eventually combine the operations if that makes sense. But that is all details we can work out together." He squeezed her hands. "The important thing is that we both keep doing what we love, what we are good at. I do not want you to give up your ranch, Vivienne. I want to help you make it thrive." "Together," Vivienne said, testing out the word. "Together," Dalton confirmed. They were married 6 weeks later, in late October of 1882, in the small church in Wickenburg. The ceremony was simple but well attended, the ranchers who had ridden patrol together filling the pews, along with townspeople who had watched Vivienne fight for her independence and were glad to see her find happiness without sacrificing it. Vivienne wore a dress of pale blue silk that she had ordered from a catalog, simple but elegant. As she walked down the aisle toward Dalton, she felt none of the fear or doubt she had expected. Instead, there was just certainty, a bone-deep knowledge that this was right. They exchanged vows in strong, clear voices, promising to honor and respect each other, to stand together through whatever challenges came. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Dalton kissed her, Vivienne felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. The reception was held at the Running Creek Ranch, where Samuel Thornton had insisted on providing space and refreshments. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Catherine Wells was notably absent, but Vivienne found she did not care. She was too happy, too surrounded by people who had come to respect her and to celebrate her joy. "I always knew you would find a way to have it all," Miguel said, pulling her aside during the festivities. His eyes were warm with affection. "A strong woman like you deserves a strong man who understands her worth." "Thank you, Miguel," Vivienne said, hugging him, "for everything, for staying with me when no one else would, for believing in me." "You made it easy to believe," Miguel replied. "You never gave up, even when things were hardest." As the evening wore on, Dalton and Vivienne slipped away from the party, riding together to the Double P. They had decided to make the ranch house their primary home, with Dalton adjusting his work schedule to spend 3 days a week at Running Creek and 4 at the Double P. Samuel Thornton had been remarkably understanding, even enthusiastic about the arrangement. "It feels strange," Vivienne said as they unsaddled their horses in the barn she had built with her own hands. "Being married, sharing my space." "We can take it slow," Dalton said, always patient. "This is your home and I am a guest until it becomes our home." But as they walked together to the house, Vivienne realized it already felt like their home. The changes had been small but significant. Dalton's spare clothes in the wardrobe, his razor by the wash basin, his coffee cup on the shelf next to hers. Little signs of a shared life, of two people blending their existences. That night, lying in Dalton's arms in the bed that had been hers alone for so long, Vivienne felt a peace she had never known. She was still herself, still the strong, independent woman who had built a ranch from nothing. But now she was also part of something larger, a partnership that made her feel supported without feeling diminished. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "I am thinking that I was wrong," Vivienne replied. "All those times I said I did not need anyone, I was confusing need with want. I still do not need anyone to rescue me or take care of me, but I want you in my life. I want this partnership, and maybe that is stronger than need ever was." Dalton kissed the top of her head. "I want you too. Every stubborn, independent, beautiful part of you." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in years, Vivienne did not wake in the middle of the night plagued by worries and fears. She had found something she had not known she was looking for, a way to be both independent and deeply connected, to maintain her strength while sharing it with someone who valued it. The following months brought new rhythms and new challenges. True to his word, Dalton split his time between the two ranches, helping Vivienne with the heavy work at the Double P while maintaining his responsibilities at Running Creek. They worked well together, Vivienne discovered. Dalton had a gift for organization and long-term planning that complemented her attention to detail and hands-on management style. In December, when it came time to make a payment to the bank, Vivienne had the money saved. The fall cattle sale had gone well, better than she had dared hope. As she handed over the payment to Horace Pemberton, she felt a deep satisfaction. "This is a substantial payment," Pemberton admitted, looking at the bank draft. "Well done, Mrs. Hayes." "Thank you," Vivienne said coolly. "I told you I would meet my obligations." She left the bank feeling lighter than air. The ranch was secure for another year, and with Dalton's help in managing both properties, she was starting to see paths forward she had never noticed before. Economies of scale, combined purchasing power, shared resources that benefited both ranches. That winter was hard, as Arizona winters could be despite the generally mild climate. There were cold snaps and occasional snow, times when the cattle needed extra care and the work seemed endless. But Vivienne faced it with Dalton at her side, and somehow the burden seemed lighter for being shared. In February, Vivienne realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the thought of bringing a child into the world with a man she loved. But also fear, because pregnancy would limit her ability to do the physical ranch work she took such pride in. She told Dalton that evening, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes went wide, then lit up with unmistakable joy. "A baby! We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Vivienne said. "I know it is going to change things, make it harder for me to work the ranch the way I am used to." Dalton took her hands, his expression serious. "It will change things, yes, but Vivienne, you are still going to be you. You can still run this ranch, still make all the decisions. You will just need to delegate some of the physical work, especially as you get further along." He smiled. "And maybe it is time we hired another hand or two anyway. The double P is growing. That is a good thing." Vivienne relaxed, realizing she had been bracing for him to suggest she step back entirely, that she rest and let him handle everything. But of course Dalton would not say that. He understood her too well. "I am scared," she admitted. "I have never been responsible for a child before." "Neither have I," Dalton said. "We will figure it out together, just like we figure everything else out. Together." The word had become their touchstone, a reminder that they were partners in all things. As spring arrived and Vivienne's pregnancy became more obvious, she found herself having to accept more help than she was comfortable with. Miguel and Carlos took on additional responsibilities, and they hired 2 more hands, young men eager to learn ranching. Vivienne supervised from horseback when she could, and from the porch when she could not, her sharp eye catching issues and her quick mind solving problems. Dalton was endlessly patient, helping her navigate the frustration of not being able to do everything she was used to doing. He brought her ranch reports to review, consulted her on every major decision, made sure she remained central to the running of the double P even when her physical capabilities were limited. "You know what I have realized?" Vivienne said one evening in late summer, when she was so heavy with child that mounting a horse had become impossible. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and amber. "Being strong does not mean doing everything yourself. It means knowing your own worth and making sure others respect it." Dalton smiled. "Took you long enough to figure that out?" Vivienne swatted his arm playfully. "I am a slow learner when it comes to accepting help." "You are learning, though," Dalton said, "and that is what matters." Their son was born in September of 1883, a healthy, squalling infant with dark hair and his father's eyes. They named him Daniel Samuel Hayes, after Dalton's father and Samuel Thornton, who had become like family to them both. Holding her son for the first time, Vivienne felt overwhelmed with love and protectiveness. This tiny person was depending on her entirely, and it was terrifying and wonderful all at once. "He is perfect," Dalton said, looking at his son with wonder. "You did so well, Vivienne." "We did well," Vivienne corrected. "We made him together." The first months of Daniel's life were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and the constant demands of a newborn. But Vivienne discovered that motherhood did not diminish her ability to run the ranch. It just required more organization and flexibility. She learned to nurse Daniel while reviewing accounts, to hold him in a sling while supervising work, to make decisions with the same sharpness even on 2 hours of sleep. And Dalton was there through all of it, sharing the nighttime feedings when Daniel would take a bottle, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with a crying infant so Vivienne could catch a few hours of desperately needed sleep. He was as devoted to their son as he was to her, and watching him with Daniel made Vivienne fall in love with him all over again. By Daniel's first birthday, the Double P Ranch was thriving. The combination of Vivienne's determination and Dalton's strategic thinking had created something stronger than either could have managed alone. They had paid down more of the bank loan, expanded their herd, and improved their grazing lands. The ranch that Vivienne had fought so hard to save was now a model of success. Samuel Thornton, growing older and increasingly troubled by his arthritis, approached them in October of 1884 with a proposal. "I want to sell you the Running Creek Ranch," he said, sitting at their kitchen table while Daniel played on the floor at his feet. "You two have been running it for me anyway, for all practical purposes. I want to retire to town, live somewhere I do not have to worry about cattle and water rights and all the rest." He named a price that was fair, more than fair considering the size and quality of the property. Vivienne and Dalton looked at each other, a whole conversation happening in that glance. It was an opportunity, a chance to create something even larger, a legacy for Daniel and any other children they might have. But it was also a massive financial commitment. "Can we have some time to think about it?" Vivienne asked. "Of course," Samuel said. "Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere quickly." After he left, Vivienne and Dalton sat down with their account books, running numbers late into the night. It would be tight, very tight. They would have to take on significant debt, and one bad year could wipe them out. But the potential was enormous. The combined properties would make them one of the largest ranching operations in the territory. "What do you think?" Dalton asked, looking at the columns of figures. "I think it is a risk," Vivienne said honestly. "A big one. But I have learned that sometimes the biggest risks bring the biggest rewards." She smiled at him. "And I have learned that I do not have to take risks alone anymore." "So we do it?" Dalton asked. "We do it," Vivienne confirmed. "Together." They bought the Running Creek Ranch in November, signing papers that left them deeply in debt, but also incredibly land-rich. The combined property sprawled across thousands of acres, with good water and excellent grazing. They renamed it the Double P and Running Creek Ranch, honoring both properties' histories. The next few years were a whirlwind of hard work and growth. They built up their herds, improved their infrastructure, hired more hands to work the expanded property. Vivienne continued to be deeply involved in every aspect of the operation, though she learned to delegate more, to trust the people who worked for them. In 1885, they had a daughter, Emma Grace, named after Vivienne's mother. She was a sunny, easy baby compared to Daniel's more serious nature, and she wrapped both her parents around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Watching Dalton with their children, seeing him balance fatherhood with the demands of the ranch, Vivienne often thought back to that day when he had first appeared on her property. She had been so certain she did not need anyone, so determined to prove her independence. And she had been right in a way. She had not needed rescuing. But she had needed partnership, had needed love, had needed someone who saw her strength and wanted to add to it rather than diminish it. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton asked one evening. They were in their bedroom, a room they had expanded and improved over the years. Through the window, they could see the ranch spread out before them, their ranch, built on both their dreams. "I am thinking about how wrong I was," Vivienne said, "when I said I was too independent." "You are independent," Dalton said. "One of the most independent people I know. You just learned that independence does not mean isolation." "You taught me that," Vivienne said softly. "You taught me that I could be strong on my own and stronger with you." "That accepting help did not make me weak. that sharing my life did not mean giving up control of it. Dalton pulled her close, kissing her forehead. You taught me things too. You taught me what real strength looks like, what determination can accomplish. You taught me that the right partner does not make you weaker, they make you better. Then we will be strong together, Vivienne said, echoing his words from so long ago. Always, Dalton agreed. By 1890, the Double P and Running Creek Ranch was one of the most successful operations in Arizona Territory. They had weathered droughts and market fluctuations, rustlers and disease, all the challenges that came with ranching in the harsh desert. And they had done it together, two strong people who had chosen to combine their strengths. Daniel was 7 now, already showing signs of inheriting both his mother's determination and his father's strategic mind. He would ride out with Dalton to check on the cattle, asking endless questions and absorbing knowledge like a sponge. Emma was 5, fearless and full of energy, equally at home helping her mother with the account books or playing in the barn with the ranch cats. In May of that year, Vivienne gave birth to twin boys, Michael and Matthew. The pregnancy had been difficult, and the birth even more so, but both babies were healthy. Dalton, watching Vivienne recover while managing to nurse both infants, said she was the strongest person he had ever known. I am not that strong, Vivienne protested. I am exhausted and overwhelmed, and I have no idea how we are going to manage 4 children and a ranch. The same way we manage everything else, Dalton said. Together, one day at a time, figuring it out as we go, and they did. The years passed in a blur of children growing and the ranch prospering. They paid off the loans, finally free and clear of debt in 1892. Vivienne cried when she made the final payment, overcome with emotion at having achieved something that had seemed impossible for so long. The bank president who had replaced Horace Pemberton shook her hand with genuine respect. You have built something remarkable, Mrs. Hayes. Against all odds, you succeeded. We succeeded, Vivienne corrected, gesturing to Dalton who stood beside her. We built this together. Looking back on those years, Vivienne could see how far she had come from the frightened, defensive woman who had been so determined to prove she did not need anyone. She had learned that strength came in many forms. There was the strength to stand alone, yes, but also the strength to accept help, to build partnerships, to let people in even when it was scary. She had learned that independence was not about isolation. It was about being whole enough in yourself that you could choose to share your life without losing who you were. She had learned that love, real love, did not diminish you. It multiplied you. Most importantly, she had learned that being too independent was not really a thing. You could be independent and partnered, strong on your own and stronger together. It was not a contradiction. It was a balance. A beautiful balance that she and Dalton had found together. By 1895, Daniel was 12 and already helping significantly with ranch work. Emma was 10, showing an aptitude for the business side of ranching that delighted Vivienne. The twins were 5, wild and energetic, keeping everyone on their toes. One evening in late summer, Vivienne and Dalton sat on their porch, watching the sun set over land that stretched as far as the eye could see. Their land, bought with sweat and determination and love. Daniel was in the barn, tending to his horse. Emma was inside, helping the housekeeper they had finally hired prepare dinner. The twins were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm evening air. "Do you ever regret it?" Dalton asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Giving up your solitary life, letting me into your world?" Vivienne looked at him, this man who had seen past her walls to the woman beneath, who had offered her partnership instead of pity, who had stood beside her through every challenge and triumph. "Never," she said. Not for a single moment. You gave me something I did not even know I was missing." "What was that?" Dalton asked. "A true partnership," Vivienne said. "Someone who made me better without asking me to be less." She smiled. "I was too independent, so set on proving I did not need anyone that I almost missed out on what we could build together." "And what have we built?" Dalton asked, though from his smile she knew he knew the answer. "Everything," Vivienne said simply. "A ranch, a family, a life. We have built everything together." Dalton took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers just as they had that first time on her porch so many years ago. "Strong together," he said. "Always," Vivienne agreed. As the sun finally slipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of purple and gold, Vivienne reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a frightened young woman fighting to keep her father's ranch, so determined to prove her independence that she had nearly closed herself off from love entirely, to this moment. A successful rancher, a wife, a mother, and still, always herself. She had learned that you did not have to choose between independence and love, between strength and partnership. You could have both. You could be fierce and soft, determined and vulnerable, independent and deeply connected. It was not about giving up who you were. It was about finding someone who loved all of who you were and wanted to build something beautiful alongside you. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and new challenges. In 1897, they added another wing to the house, expanding to accommodate their growing family. In 1898, they survived a drought that tested every bit of their resourcefulness and determination. But they survived it together, their partnership stronger than any hardship. Daniel grew into a young man who combined the best of both his parents, strong and determined like his mother, thoughtful and strategic like his father. At 18, he was already managing significant portions of the ranch operation, showing leadership that made both Vivienne and Dalton proud. Emma developed into a sharp businesswoman, taking over much of the financial management of the ranch by the time she was 16. She had her mother's head for numbers and her father's ability to see the big picture, and together with Daniel, they represented the future of the ranch. The twins, Michael and Matthew, were inseparable and endlessly energetic, bringing laughter and occasional chaos to the household. They were 12 in 1897, still young but already showing signs of the men they would become. In 1899, as the new century approached, Vivienne and Dalton sat down to take stock of their lives. They were in their early 40s now, their children growing up, their ranch more successful than they had ever dreamed possible. "We have done well," Dalton said, looking at the account books that showed their prosperity. The ranch that Vivienne had nearly lost to foreclosure was now worth more than either of them could have imagined. "We have," Vivienne agreed. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how far we have come." "Do you ever miss it?" Dalton asked. "The way things were before, when it was just you against the world." Vivienne considered the question seriously. Did she miss that fierce, lonely independence? The days when every decision was hers alone, when she answered to no one, when she stood entirely on her own strength? "No," she said finally. "I do not miss it. I am glad I went through it, glad I proved to myself that I could stand alone. But this, what we have built together, this is so much better than anything I could have achieved on my own." She looked at Dalton, still handsome despite the silver threading through his dark hair, still steady and strong. "You were right, that first day when you said we would be strong together. We are, stronger than I ever was alone, and I was pretty strong." Dalton laughed. "You were terrifying, but now you are terrifying with backup." Vivienne smiled. "The best kind of terrifying." As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, The Hayes family stood as a testament to what partnership and determination could build. The ranch continued to thrive, now employing dozens of workers and spanning thousands of acres. It was a legacy, something that would pass to their children and their children's children. But more than the material success, more than the land and the cattle and the prosperity, Vivienne treasured the life she had built with Dalton. A life of partnership and respect, of shared burdens and multiplied joys. She had learned that being independent did not mean being alone, that accepting help did not make you weak, that love could exist alongside strength. On a warm evening in June of 1900, they celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, their ranch hands, and the community they had become part of. As Vivienne looked around at the gathering, at the life they had created, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Miguel, now elderly but still sharp-eyed, raised a glass. To Vivienne and Dalton Hayes. When they met, she said she was too independent. He said they would be strong together. And they were right, both of them. Everyone cheered and drank, and Vivienne felt Dalton's hand find hers under the table, his fingers intertwining with hers just as they had countless times before. She squeezed back, a silent communication of love and gratitude. Later, after the guests had left and the children had gone to bed, Vivienne and Dalton stood together on their porch, looking out over the land they had built together. The moon was rising over the eastern hills, casting silver light over the desert. "Any regrets?" Dalton asked softly. "Not a single one," Vivienne replied. "You taught me that strength was not about standing alone. It was about knowing your own worth and finding someone who respected it, who wanted to add to it rather than diminish it." "And you taught me," Dalton said, "that real independence is not about isolation. It is about being whole enough in yourself that you can choose to share your life, not because you need to, but because you want to." "We taught each other," Vivienne corrected. "That is what partnership is. Two whole people choosing to build something together, not out of weakness or need, but out of strength and love." Dalton pulled her close, and she leaned into his embrace, still marveling after all these years at how natural it felt, how right. She was still herself, still strong and determined and capable. But now she was also part of something larger, a partnership that had created a life beyond anything she could have imagined. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily after years of practice. "Thank you for seeing past my walls, for offering partnership instead of pity, for standing beside me all these years." "I love you too," Dalton replied. "Thank you for letting me in, for teaching me what real strength looks like, for building this life with me." They stood there together under the stars. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had learned to combine their strengths instead of competing with them. Vivienne had been right when she said she was too independent, but Dalton had been more right when he said they would be strong together. Because they were. Stronger than either could have been alone, their partnership a foundation upon which they had built everything that mattered. A ranch, a family, a legacy, and most importantly, a love that had weathered every storm and grown deeper with every passing year. As they finally went inside, walking through the house they had expanded and improved together, past rooms filled with their children, Vivienne reflected on the unexpected journey her life had taken. She had started out determined to prove she did not need anyone, and she had succeeded in proving exactly that. But in the process, she had discovered something far more valuable. She had learned that not needing someone and not wanting someone were very different things. She had learned that accepting help was not weakness, that sharing burdens did not diminish her strength. Most importantly, she had learned that love, real love, existed not despite her independence but because of it. Dalton had never asked her to be less than she was. He had simply offered to stand beside her while she was everything she could be, and then helped her become even more. Together, they had built something that would last, something that would continue long after they were gone. As Vivienne settled into bed beside her husband, she felt a peace and contentment that the young woman she had been, fighting so hard to stand alone, could never have imagined. She was still independent, still strong, still capable. But now she was also loved and partnered and part of something greater than herself. "Good night," Dalton murmured, already half asleep. "Good night," Vivienne replied, nestling closer to him. And as she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of gratitude. Gratitude for the strength that had allowed her to survive alone, and gratitude for the wisdom that had allowed her to recognize when being alone was no longer necessary. She had been too independent, perhaps, but Dalton had been right. They were strong together. And together, they had built a life worth living, a love worth having, and a legacy worth leaving behind.